Next Curve.
Hey everybody, welcome to this Next Curve Rethink podcast episode where we break down the latest tech and industry events and happenings into the insights that matter. And I'm Leonard Lee, executive analyst at Next Curve. And in this episode, we will be talking about the highlights and the hot takes from MWC 2025, which took place last week in Barcelona or Barcelona. I think that's correct, right? Barcelona, Spain, with over 109,000 people in attendance over 4 days of telco/mobile industry madness. And I'm joined by two very, 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 very special guests. The remarkable Peter Jarich of GSMA Intelligence and the legendary Chetan Sharma of Chetan Sharma Consulting. Gentlemen, how's it going?
I'm just trying to figure out. I think 2.5 of those varies are for Chetan, and I get half of that vary. I'll take my half. That's fine.
I had to wake him up because he looks like he's about to fall asleep. So.
It's early. It's early on your coast, folks.
Yeah, it is. But you know, Chetan works hard. He gets up you're like one of those guys that wakes up at 4 a.m. in the morning, right, Chetan? Come on, tell the truth.
So that means yes.
Yeah. So before we get started, please remember to like, share, and react and comment on this episode. Also, subscribe here on YouTube and on Buzzsprout. Listen to us on your favorite podcast platform. Opinions and statements by my guests are entirely their own and don't reflect mine or those of Next Curve. We're doing this to provide an open forum for discussion and debate. We hope you find the program informative and fun. And with that, gentlemen, let's dive into this because there's a lot to cover. I'm really looking forward to your takes and your insights from this year's event, which, by the way, I thought was fabulous. But why don't we start off with this? Your impression in one word, or maybe a pair of words. How would you describe this year's event?
Go, Peter.
I'm going to say frank and honest, and what I mean is
You're cheating.
Frank. I'll just say. Well, if I said Frank, people might think I was talking like, who's Frank? Who is this Frank guy? Peter's talking about.
Yeah.
So that's why I said. I mean, it's interesting because if you looked at some of the comments right off the keynotes, right, I think some of them were like, "Oh, it feels like Groundhog Day. We've been saying the same things over and over and over, especially around regulation, especially in the state of the industry." But the tone was different, right? The tone was much more of like it was much more direct, and I think no matter where you fit on the political spectrum, I think that we know that the U.S. administration, in some ways, has sort of enabled a more direct, frank. Sort of less polite tenor of conversation. And I think you saw that reflected, right? You saw that reflected in a lot of the conversations of, okay, folks, this is the way it is. Or even the conversations around geopolitics weren't so much like one side says, oh, China's more interested in domestic issues and there's no real issue with other, the US. And the response not being, well, I think we have a different view. No, the response was just very clear. No, you're wrong. And here's why, right? So I think it was refreshing in some ways, in that there were a lot of conversations that were really important conversations, and they were still polite and genuine, but also a little bit more direct than I'd say sometimes we said.
Interesting. Chetan?
Yeah, and not to just add to what Peter said, but I think it was much more pragmatic, kind of more grounded in reality on a number of fronts. Geopolitics is one of them, but 6G, for example, is another one. AI kind of AI was all over the place. So it was probably, you got to have at least one thing that is on the hype scale. So AI was that thing this year.
Yeah.
But I always love going to the show because it just gives you, in 4 days, a good grounding of what's to come, and get a sense of where the industry is at. And you can just eke out a lot of pearls of wisdom from just talking to friends and colleagues that you cannot do any other way.
Yeah. I mean, these are great ways of describing the event this year. I agree with both of you. I guess I will add present. And I say that versus the future, because last year it was future first, and I really I thought that was not a good focus or a good theme for the event. I was just glad to see that there was a lot of focus on the present. When you talk to a lot of the companies, again, colleagues and friends in the industry, there's this desire to get back to what is it that we need to do to move the ball. And I thought that was very comforting. I think it's a really good direction for GSMA as a whole. And so, hey, big thumbs up, proof that I'm not like a Debbie Downer all the time. I just want the industry, like all of us, want it to go in a better direction. And I think GSMA this year and all the partner members, they did the right thing. And you're absolutely right. And that this is they had to anticipate this before a lot of the geopolitical turmoil was stirred up. So that was a good call. So yeah, really great stuff. So gentlemen, what were some of the themes that stuck out for you this year as you were roaming the halls and giving interviews or moderating panels? And Peter, what else do you do? You do a lot of other stuff, right? You're managing a friggin' team of like massive.
I go where I'm told. No, it's. I had this conversation with some folks and saying, in theory, the way I set up meetings and do what I do should be different now that I run a team versus when I was in. But I do the exact same thing I did probably 20 years ago. I schedule a bunch of meetings, don't pay attention to where they are, so go from hall 6 to hall 8 to hall 1 back to back.
Yeah.
So no, I'm do not follow my example. I mean, so I would say I think Chetan hit a good one. 6G, interesting 6G conversations, not as many as I expected, particularly around questions around geopolitical concerns and fragmentation of technologies.
No.
A lot of vertical conversations. I think if there was sort of one sub theme that I thought was really interesting, it was sort of critical communications and defense as a standout growing vertical of interest. Right. If you wandered the halls enough, you saw the folks from the DoD there. We all know that the U.S. Department of Defense is looking at some of these commercial technologies in particularly interesting ways. A lot of discussion around network resilience to protect against either man-made or natural disasters. And really, I think we know those other verticals that we've been talking about: ports, mining, utilities. You've seen some of those, but I think the bubbling up of defense was a really interesting one that kind of captured the interest in pulling verticals in, the for monetization of those networks, things like Open RAN, but then also the geopolitical angle. So I think it was an interesting sort of encapsulation of all those things.
Yeah. Chetan?
Yeah, for me, the thing that really stood out, probably from day zero, which is like Saturday, Sunday, was the geopolitics. I think, like, if you sit back and say, what are the ground truths that I didn't know coming into the show? Geopolitics has been an overhang for a long time, but the way it accelerated and permeated in every conversation behind the scenes was a bit striking, and for obvious reasons. And so beyond the tariff discussion, I think there is something brewing that could be a permanent reset in how alliances are formed. And we just don't know where it's going to all settle. But the questions being asked are very different than what they were 2, 3, 4, 5 weeks ago. So that was something new and different. NTN, as expected, is surfacing up as kind of a must-have feature. I mean, there is still a distance between having the feature and monetization, but NTN has jumped as something that every operator is looking at, every country is looking at. The lack of 6G, or I guess there's not a lot about talk about 6G, but like what will lead to 6G? Like what's the 5G advanced path? What features are going to be there that lead to 6G? So I think that's the right discussion. So we focus on here and now, and as you said, and then figure out what the roadmap is for 6G. And because I had this fear of getting sucked into the 3GPP vortex, and
Yeah.
not really stepping back and saying, let's learn from what happened with 5G and focus more on the economics of these solutions and the infrastructure rollouts versus just blindly following one another off the cliff.
It is worth noting. I think maybe some of the, and again, I was surprised on the 6G front because last year we had conversations around let's make sure 6G remains a global standard. You would think a year later that seems even more in peril given where we are in the world. I was surprised to think about more, but we all know this week in Korea, it's the big 6G-a-thon, right? And there's a lot of conversations, a lot of discussions. So that may have stolen some of the thunder, perhaps, and maybe siphoned off some of the discussion. But yeah, it was kind of refreshing. I don't think any of us missed the 6G conversation. I can't say I was actually missing it, but yeah, it wasn't quite there.
Yeah. I think there was like you mentioned practical before, Chetan, a practical grounded focus on 5G. A lot of talk about SA, at least in the discussions that I've had. And I spent a lot of time at their Ericsson booth. And so, as we all know, and we've been to their events, one of the things that they're looking to do is really move the ball on 5G, even ahead of all the 6G talk. I think that those are two separate conversations at the moment, because the dilemma right now is how do we continue to progress 5G where operators can benefit from what I call this technological backlog that we have now with 5G as we're moving toward specification release 19. I mean, there's all these features. You mentioned features, right? All these features that are untapped. And so one of the things that I think is important, and I think you're starting to see this urgency start to form this year, is the need to tell the story about how our operators, pioneering operators like T-Mobile and others around the globe, leveraging these new capabilities and technologies to create new services. And then what are some of these patterns and modalities of monetization that can be had, right? Because, this whole monetization topic has been such a ridiculous one, quite honestly.
It is. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And one of the things I noticed is there's this huge gap between the technology and the monetization piece. There's like this big gap that hasn't been addressed and spoken to very well. And I think we're starting to see people talk about it. And I think that's another hopeful outcome of this more grounded agenda, whether it was intended or not. It came off like that to me of Mobile World Congress. And what it seems like GSMA is either subconsciously or consciously pursuing this year and hopefully going forward. So anyways, I don't know.
I think it's interesting though, to your point though. So I think it is tough, right? I think it's tough because you have different personas which show up to any show. So there's some people that are there who want to think about that bigger transformation and think about how do we actually drive outcomes and monetize. There are other people who are there to talk technology, right? And so you will always see that they want to understand how we enable slicing. It's not their job to figure out how you make money from it. So it's always difficult when you've got that sort of different people there. But I'll say, to your point, the number of times I heard people sort of reference things like the T priority service and what T-Mobile was doing as like here's a great example, and we're actually seeing slicing, and this is kind of cool, right? So I think people are, when they see those good examples, and that one I think plays to exactly what you're talking about. There's a lot of SA. Just there seemed like there was a guarded optimism around SA maybe finally sort of potentially taking off. And because we've been talking about it for a while, and we've seen the slow growth, and we know it's what holds back things like slicing, and we know it's what holds back a lot of things. I think it's also holding back a little bit of the 5G advanced discussion, because a lot of operators are going to want to have SA before they do, even though it's not required for a lot of 5G advanced capabilities. A lot of operators will want to do it. So, but yeah, I think some of those good examples, you're 100% right. We need to see them, and when they're good ones, people do get excited about them.
Yeah.
With some of these features, I think it's kind of important to note that these features need to be consumable. Just because they exist doesn't mean third parties can just take advantage of them. And slicing is a great example where last year Ericsson showed how slicing was integrated into the Sony cameras. And so that's a great example of the third party not worrying about the complexity of the technology. They just want to consume it
Yeah.
and figure out the pricing and monetization on their end. And that's what you need from these features. They need to be exposed in a way that they are consumable, just like an Amazon API, right? I just have my credit card. I want this feature. I put my credit card. I consume it, and that's the level of simplicity it needs to be there, which was not there prior to that. I mean, slicing has been around for some time.
Oh,
So
yeah.
I think we are getting to a point where these features, whether the operators use for their own purpose, like T-priority or network management or congestion management, or you make it available to the enterprises who can consume it on demand as needed on a predictable pricing plan, then it becomes all of a sudden, and you don't have to talk to anybody. Like you just go and figure it out on a website or through an API. I think that's when it scales. If there is too much hand-holding or too much complexity, it holds it back.
Yeah. Well, yeah, regarding the network slicing, the way I look at it is more of an underlying capability. And as you move toward 5G SA, you have the ability to institute network slices in a very dynamic way. And what that means is that, from a service perspective, you can design things that are event-based or, condition or context-based, right? So these can be deployed very quickly. They may be high value scenarios, but they're not permanent. They're ephemeral. They're there when you need it, and then they disappear. And then they're also balanced against whatever available capability and capacity in that particular location. And so I think that's one of the things that's important for the industry to understand, because like you guys, gentlemen, have been saying, network slicing has been a part of the telco discourse for a long time. A lot of people scratching their heads about, well, when's all the hypothetical stuff going to happen? Oddly, the weird thing about technology is that it does realize itself over time, right? Over time, and I think we're at a different point now where the technology has matured, and you can actually realize capabilities are beyond what we had before. And so I think a lot of us have been disenamored or I don't know if that's the right term, disillusioned. Yes,
it's fine. It's fine. Disenamored is a good word.
Disenamored. Okay.
We'll get into the dictionary. Don't worry. If it doesn't exist, well.
Yeah, I was always really bad at the verbal section of the SAT. But anyways, and so there is a bit of an overshooting. We disregard things like, you're bringing up network slicing. We talked about that forever, but there are these new possibilities. I think we just need to frame those in the proper way. And, I think that's the thing that we can do going forward, is help people understand what is now this nouveau role of network slicing and all these other things that come together in compelling new ways. So anyway, I
think as much as pragmatic though, and I don't want to be the negative Nelly or whatever, however you referenced yourself, Leonard, but I from a pragmatism standpoint, I saw a couple times people talk about things like so network slicing, right? Network slicing, and I think taking what you were saying, Chetan, about making this stuff consumable, right? If I think about consumable and I think network slicing, it sort of leads to a conversation of network APIs, the Open Gateway Initiative. We've seen everything that's taking place on there, an extension of things like quality on demand.
Yeah.
Right. Network APIs, big discussion. Obviously, last year, we start seeing more and more operators getting involved. Quality on demand. A lot of the initial work has been done around identity, SIM swap, fraud, security, things that there's a very clear ROI. People are looking towards quality on demand going forward, which kind of goes to sort of the broader slicing story. But I had some interesting conversations with people say, yes, that's really exciting. If we can get to the end of the year with one or two good use cases, that's wonderful. We need to be patient. And I've heard people talking about, and I think if you're out there, and I think you were at the like Ericsson pre-brief. They had the CEO of Aduna, and really great job explaining sort of the business model. But said, look, some analysts asked him about numbers, how much activity do we expect going forward? Said, look, we just need to be patient around this stuff. This takes time. Totally appreciate whether it's rolling out quality demand, whether it's predicting the future on how much activity we'll see there. Appreciate the pragmatism, but we need to be patient.
Yeah.
But I worry because no one's patient.
Yeah.
Like this is not a world where people are like, yeah, no, I take a damn. Heck, you know what? If you were doing badly financially, I would be worried, but you're not. You're making tons of money. The industry's in great shape. Take all the time you need. That's not the case. We're not in that space, right? We're not in a space where telco is pulling in, is pulling in tons of money, right? We know that, right? You sit. It's the message you hear in the keynote, the first keynote of the year. You see that giant, the giant chart that looks like this, and the number
Yeah.
that looks like this that shows cost versus whatever metric, right? And balancing that against, oh, don't worry, let's be patient. We have time to figure this out. I do worry that there sometimes, especially with some of these new technologies, there does need to be a little bit more. Um, Now I'm at a loss for words there, Leonard. Sort of, right? And
No
I think
pressure.
that yeah, we need to recognize the continued urgency around making some of these things work because as much as I think we're also in a better place where we know how the hyperscalers are
Yeah.
partnering with the operators. They're also, in many ways, on some of these things, very potential competitors, right? And
Of course.
unless we get things figured out, right? Unless how many times have we talked about a potential future in which Apple figures out how to make slicing a reality? We know it's in iOS, embeds it in, the App Store, and sort of kind of like we saw with driving the narrative on
Yeah.
eSIM, right? I think
Yeah.
there's be a bit of an urgency there of making sure we execute on some of these capabilities. And a
Yeah.
lot of operators have it. Don't get me wrong.
Yeah.
You saw so much activity from so many operators, they get it. I just think that needs to be a story that they all understand.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, Chetan, any comment? I mean, he's making a great point, by the way. I think it's something that,
No, he's spot on. I mean, you have to have, I mean, patience is absolutely warranted, but also you need rapid. I think in countries where all three operators or all four operators are on the same platform, it's relatively easier to offer that to the developer community or the
yeah.
enterprise versus if there is only one operator from a country who is signed up. And so I think you would expect that those countries or those operators in those countries will make good progress and the numbers will start piling up. And at some point, you do have to discuss the numbers in terms because you have to do trillions of transactions to make billions in from all this stuff. And so we just need to see what path are we on in terms of number of transactions taking place on a daily basis. Once you have a sense of the trajectory, then you can do basic math, right? How many operators you add to this mix, how many more APIs you add to the mix to see if there is a hockey curve or it's a steady growth. In both cases, it's fine, but you do need to show progress on a year-over-year basis so it's meaningful. Otherwise, uh, as you mentioned, their competitors, which probably offer a more holistic offering, with storage and compute as well. And so if developer is thinking about a new way of driving some application, they just want a one-stop shop. They don't want to go for certain applications, for certain APIs to the operator and certain workloads to the hyperscalers. And so there is that tension as well as urgency to address that.
Yeah. And my observation is a lot of the stuff is still pretty well misunderstood. I wrote a number of pieces in the run-up of MWC about network APIs and Aduna in particular, and its role as an exchange. And so I think you guys are making a great point here. It's what is this Aduna thing, and what is an API exchange? What should we expect of it? And should it be the same as, let's say, what we would typically consider a commercial concern or, let's say a platform, right? But it's not entirely that. I think one of the things that the Ericsson folks and their partners have been trying to emphasize is that this is kind of like a semi for profit. This is like profit to profit enough to survive or sustain itself type of model. And I think that's where we have to recognize that from a business entity perspective, right? And its role within the broader ecosystem. But Peter, you're absolutely right. In the bigger picture, it needs to figure out, okay, how what is that large scale value that network APIs are going to deliver, and what is the role of the aggregators in these network API exchanges in scaling the markets for exposed network functions or capabilities. And I think trust is going to be a really huge thing. Guys, look, I don't know if any of you go to RSAC, but the fear around AI is palpable. It's growing because it's just the threats that AI, in particular Gen AI augmented attacks present is just absolutely frightening for the cybersecurity and cyber trust community. And so in simple things like trust, security, I think there's a huge opportunity for these network APIs where the operators are going to be able to express their network capabilities in supporting a lot of trust functions above the level. And so this becomes less of an ROI thing for companies, but more of a huge risk mitigation, because literally, I don't think, I look at my mailbox, about 90% of the stuff I get now, just spam or some kind of really compelling phishing email, or a conversational, like a prompt to engage in a conversational phishing chat stream. I mean, it's outrageous.
Stop there before you get yourself in trouble. This doesn't sound like it's going. I don't know what these conversations are, but no, I think it's you're. I was about to say I was worried about AI before I saw the robotic vacuums that we decided to give AI and limbs. Now that they're robot vacuums that can pick things up and they've got AI, I was more worried.
Gosh.
No, but
Yeah.
I think the difficult part is, here's where we are.
Yeah.
2 years ago, we had to explain to people why this was important, right? We had to explain that, oh, look, a common set of APIs is better than proprietary APIs because it can scale, and I had to explain that. But now we're in the nitty-gritty of how does it work, and how do exchanges work, and what are the pricing models, and and I think to some extent that's what folks like Aduna are there to help sort out, but it doesn't make it any easier, right? And so it's a much more complicated. On top of that, then building the demand, right? Going out, building that, and I work with folks, here internally at the GSMA who are trying to go out and figure out how do you build that demand? How do you go to potential consumers of this and say, here's why you want this, right? The social media companies that in some jurisdictions will get in trouble if they are serving up social media to someone who is under 16. So if there's a simple way to go and prove this, but then, and here's the fun, like we have a roundtable on network APIs and developers with a bunch of folks, and here was an interesting sort of thing that I had thought of. The industry has spent, you talked about sort of phishing and scam, and there's no joke there, right? I don't mean to make light of that. Fraud.
That was pretty funny though.
I don't know about yours, but fraud is a horrible. There are all sorts of horror stories about people who lose not only their life savings, but in different economies are finding themselves basically part of modern slavery because they fell afoul of something. So this is really horrible. But we've spent years telling people dual factor authentication and do all these things. What's going to happen when now we sort of use APIs to make that more seamless? We're going to have to re-educate people of, well, don't worry, the operator solved that by knowing where you are in your phone. And so I think it's more than just business level transformation. It's transformation of the way we engage with our operators, which is really where they should be the whole time. They should be in the middle of that. So it's yeah, I think
Yeah.
ultimately it's a really good thing.
Yeah. Yeah. Any final thoughts on this big topic, Chetan?
Okay. I think it's to be continued.
Okay. All right. So the next thing I want to do here is just get your real quick takes on a number of themes that I thought were pretty important going in. I mean, or at least, they're carryovers from last year, some of them, but then some that we anticipated would be big things this year. So the first thing that I want to ask you gentlemen about is the question that everybody wants to know. Okay. Metaverse. Okay. Thank you. Next topic. Right? I mean, hey, anything? No? Okay, we can move on. All right.
I mean, I'm sure there were. I'm sure in a couple of booths there were interesting
You have to go
metaverse.
there. Yeah.
I'm sure there were a few. I did
Yeah.
not see them, unfortunately.
Yeah, I know. We have to be kind. All right. So the elephant in the room, if not just the elephant, generative AI and agentic AI. What did you guys think?
I mean, Gen AI transformed into agentic AI this year. Last year it was all about Gen AI. This year it was all about agentic AI.
Yeah.
So I mean, AI has been clearly there's the hype part.
Yeah.
But then if you look beyond beneath the surface, especially I mean, there are three areas that have surfaced over the last year where AI is making an impact that it was not doing before. One is clearly customer service, and that's the low-hanging fruit. Second is kind of knowledge management within the enterprise, and so that's not unique to telco; it's across all the enterprises. But the one where it's really starting to make some dent, and it's a very complicated deployment, is that of network management. How do you automate functions of an enormously complex network and network nodes in a way that manages congestion, does fraud detection, detects anomalies, solves real-time issues automatically, energy management, and so on and so forth. So I think there is definitely progress on that front, especially because there are a lot of software solutions to the generally hardware ecosystem. And here both the traditional OEMs, but also a number of startups are taking a crack at it. And companies like Opanga Networks or IRA and others are making substantial progress in how you ingest network data and then turn into some sort of a actionable intelligence in a closed loop manner, which is enormously hard to do.
Yeah.
And so there is definitely good progress in terms of on all these fronts, from the startups, from the OEMs, and that's what I'm most excited about.
Yeah. Yeah. Peter.
I'd say, I mean, you can't spell agentic AI without Gen AI. Just to,
yeah, I mean, it's
I mean, honestly, Gen AI and no. So I think what's interesting is we always need something new, right? You don't want to go another year and say what. So yeah, agentic AI was the new hotness this year. Everyone wanted to talk about it. But I read a blog post which I think was really spot on, where it said, remember a couple of years ago when Gen AI was the big thing, and then everyone you talked to, every supplier had Gen AI integrated into their solutions. They're like, look for the same thing from agentic AI. And sure, same thing, right? You saw the number of booths. Come talk to us. We'll develop an agent with you. We'll develop an agent for you. And it really did take over. But I think ultimately, I think it took over because the question is, well, what do we want AI to do, right? We want it to actually deliver an action, right? Do something, not just tell us something. So I think it is pointing to that interest there of actually having a human in the loop in some cases, but actually taking action where it becomes really not whether or not all the agentic AI we saw was really agentic AI or not, I don't know. But what I think was more, from my standpoint, I think if we were looking for something new, agentic AI was clearly there, but what I thought was new on the AI front, which I thought was more interesting for me, was this focus on what we can do with networks to support AI, right? Because we
Mhm.
know that we've all had this conversation around AI for networks versus networks for AI, and Chetan called up like the perfect example of AI for networks, right? We're seeing AI being used, network automation, network optimization. We're seeing progress there. That's where a lot of operators are focused, but where they haven't been focused is how do we need
Yeah.
to invest in and develop our networks to support future AI workloads.
Mm.
We that's been a discussion point that's been out there for a while, and of course, all of the infrastructure vendors are going to want to talk that up. Hey, make sure you're investing in your network to support AI. But I think we saw some interesting. I mean, we saw some interesting stuff this year from
Mm.
whether it was like AWS working with operators to get their data, just to get their data in place,
Yeah.
which is critical, or whether it was the Verizon launch right before MWC focused on edge and edge workloads and edge inferencing, or
Yeah.
whether it's just people like building out backbones. I think you're beginning to see some of this focus on as a way to monetize their networks, recognizing that AI is going to require certain capabilities, and that I thought was particularly interesting. Agentic AI was the buzz, but this bubbling up of operators who seem to be investing in places that will support AI with a potential to monetize that was more it was more encouraging.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, my observation was this is that we went from like last year, there was this notion that generative AI would be able to do things that are very granular and deep in the network, code generation, spit out, network config files on the fly type of thing. I think we've moved away from that. And now, there's a realization that you really have to start from the top down. And so doing things in a longer time scale where the generative AI tools can have the opportunity to assist a person in the middle in making better decisions. And so it's more of an assistive, co-pilot type of model. Assistive. I didn't quite see anybody with the courage this year to suggest that you're going to take this stuff to, let's say, level 4, even 3 autonomous networks. And if anybody can actually show me something in production, give me a call, or give all of us a call, or maybe Chetan knows somebody that did it. But I didn't see anything like that this year, or anyone courageous enough to say that they've deployed it in production. So I think generative AI is starting to, again, get grounded, the conversation get grounded, whether people know it or not. And then the agentic stuff, I think, is really just becoming augmented or slightly enhanced RPA. You look at the frameworks, you look at the tooling, you look at how narrow the deployments are in terms of the actual, application of generative AI. It's starting to get grounded as well, and that's what we can expect in every hype cycle, right? Is that these technologies land where they are actually usable. And these are some of the patterns that I started to see. I think we still have the rest of the year for the industry to catch up and realize that, these are, the valuable, implementation patterns for using this technology.
Be careful, Leonard. Be careful. So I think you're right. And I was at CES, I was in a session around AI, and someone said, "Oh, agentic AI is the big new thing. Does everyone out
Yeah.
there know what it means?" And there's a bunch of people like, "It's RPA on steroids." And I was
Yeah.
like, "Oh, okay." But what's interesting is, and I think we all need to be careful of this, is I've been in so many group chats and emails where someone talks
Yeah.
about some new agentic AI innovation or some innovation, and then you get like a dozen responses going, "Oh, that's just ML. I've been doing like I was doing that 20 years ago with COBOL."
Yeah.
And I was this, and I think you do see this, particularly with folks who've been around the industry for a while, to sort of, I know we're all a bit jaded, but we look at these things and go, "Oh, that's not new. That's not AI. That's machine learning." And I was doing that in college back in the 60s.
Yeah, maybe
And so,
not. Yeah.
and so we need, and so I think, and I see that, right? That's sort of oh, well, agentic AI is just RPA. It's a great way to describe it. but we still need to be open to at least some of this being innovative, or else we're going to seem
Well,
old. We're going to seem old
well,
and cranky.
no. Well, I think that's where the grounding happens. Actually, the odd thing is, as you get older and more experienced, you do see that the newer generations don't know about the old stuff, and then things that were esoteric to the old generation all of a sudden become a new thing. And that's why I think analysts play an important role. Technologists who have legacy play a role in reminding folks about the history. And there's nothing wrong about saying that it's RPA. Yes, these are, I think AI is an incremental technology as much as everyone says that it's revolutionary, and it will make things that are already on the continuum of AI evolution to make application patterns like RPA even better. And there's nothing wrong with that. That's great. But I think the hyped narratives suggest something far more dramatic and outrageous than what the reality is. And so, I guess I will dare to be dangerous. How's that, Peter?
Wow, were you doing a Nick Cage impression there? It sounded like no. I mean, I think.
Oh my God, I love you guys.
That was good. No, I think it is. I think for me, I think just on the agentic conversation, right? I think you're right. Having a bit of a history there, because what was the one thing that we didn't see this year? We didn't see AI devices. I mean, don't get me wrong. I think DT had their example AI, but last year, right?
Oh,
last year there was the humane pin, there was rabbits, right?
Yeah.
That was sort of the big news, and those kind of all went away. But the reality is, those were just hardware forms of agentic AI.
Yeah.
Right? You're supposed to tell your rabbit, go and buy flowers for my wife, and it was supposed to go do it, right?
Yeah.
But we weren't quite there yet, and so I think it is important to have that sort of history and go, okay, well maybe next year's the year for those devices when we get agentic AI figured out. I don't know.
I
don't buy flowers. I don't care.
We'll eventually maybe get there if it makes sense. I think is really what it boils down to. But okay. Now, thoughts on private 5G, because the last few years, private 5G was supposed to be sort of this, stimulant for the 5G movement. Any thoughts there? What did you guys see in that regard?
Kind of steady progress from last year. I think in private 5G, there are two worlds, China and the rest of the world. And so in China, it continues to be on a hockey curve, where the rest of the world is just making steady progress. And so the question is, what are those forms of progress? Operator spectrum, CBRS, and so on and so forth. And so it's still not at a point where it's at the knee of the curve. It's just, you go from 10 to 20 deployments, but still fairly minor stuff in the rest of the world from a private 5G point of view. But the real progress is happening in China on private 5G front.
It is. I think. Yeah. Same. We saw definitely picking up. It is incremental. You need the solutions in place. You need a broad ecosystem. And I think it was always going to take a while for this to ramp up. You need the enterprises. I think this goes back to what you were saying, before. Is we need those good examples, right? So as you see those examples, it becomes much easier for some other enterprise to say, I get it. Here's how it fits into what I'm doing. And then understand how it fits into every vertical's need, because every vertical is different, right? Manufacturing has a different requirement than mining, than a port, than public safety, than whatever.
And, Chetan, I read your event summary. By the way, awesome. Anybody out there who wants to read a really nice recap of MWC, go to Chetan's LinkedIn profile. He has that posted as a newsletter. I'm sure you're going to have it on your website as well. But you mentioned something about the reluctance, or I don't know how I don't recall how you described it, but it was along the lines of enterprises are reluctant or cautious about approaching.
I think what I was talking about is the operators being reluctant to go after the enterprise market.
Oh, okay.
the way they should. I think the big part of money we we have been saying since start of 5G is the enterprise market, and I think only China has cracked that nut, and other operators are just not quite there yet as to
Yeah.
how they want to approach that marketplace. Should they do it themselves? Should they do through the channels, through SIs, and so on and so forth? So I see a reluctance. Which is born out of should we build this stuff first, this capability, and then go to the market or organically grow it? And so that is taking time. Whereas in China, all three operators are just hitting the road with full
Yeah.
guns. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Interesting. Yeah. The other thing that I'd like to get your takes on, AI ran. You kind of hinted a little bit about it, Peter, but what were your observations about AI ran at MWC? I know it's a rather new topic because AI ran Alliance was introduced just last year, or at least it formed last year. But where do you guys think we are with AI ran? How's that conversation shaping up?
Yeah, I think. I
Look
mean,
like
I
that?
think. I think there's a lot of questions about what it means, right? So I think when it formed last year, to some extent, there was some. I mean, and they did a really good job. I think if you pay attention to what the Iran Alliance was doing, and they've grown their numbers for a reason because people sort of see that connection. But I think there was some suspicion, right? Because of the various different use cases they called out, one of them is, well, you know what? Run your AI workloads on the same compute that you'd run AI on, as you're doing RAN and AI the same. And when you're not doing your RAN, you could do AI stuff. I think there's a bit of a suspicion of, is this just a way to sell me more chipsets to sell GPUs? Wait, is this just NVIDIA saying you need to buy more GPUs, and I'm going to give you more? I'm going to explain to you other reasons why you need to buy GPUs and a way to grow the market. And so I think there was a bit of a suspicion there. And also, are we ready prime time for running these RAN workloads on GPUs? What I think is interesting is, a year later, I think people have sort of understood more of everything that this means, right? Which is part of what Chetan was saying, using AI to improve our RAN operations, right? Embedding AI into what we're doing in the RAN to improve that. And that's obviously going forward towards 6G. Some of those use cases of how would I run RAN on GPUs, but also recognizing that it's possibly a bit all of the above as I evolve my network. And here was an interesting example that, just talking with someone, and this is for anyone who hasn't been to MWC, part of, I think, that the value of being there as an analyst is you have conversations that things make sense. But I was talking with a big operator who's trying to think about their enterprise strategy, right? And the first part of most of these enterprise strategies involve things like, putting a server on-prem, right? And then you do something with that server, right? And they're a big proponent of virtualized RAN. So, hey, so I'm going to put this server in the enterprise, run some RAN workloads on it. Now, in the enterprise, they may not need to be running that RAN with the same level of redundancy or the same level of capacity as you would in the outdoors. So if you do have a server that you've deployed in the enterprise as part of your enterprise 5G strategy, and you're running RAN on it, and you have spare capacity, well, then maybe it makes sense to use that same capacity to do some AI things, right? And when you think about it like that, and you connect those dots, then people go, oh, okay. So yeah, I could see how this could all fit together. So I think as people understand what AI RAN means, everything from optimizing the RAN to doing multiple different workloads, AI for RAN, RAN for AI on RAN, whatever. Again, same conversation before. It takes a while for people to get, but it makes sense in some instances. And now we just need to see where those instances are and how they play out.
Yeah, I
Did
think
any of that
so.
make sense?
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely
Yeah.
makes sense. Yeah. So
Surprisingly, yes, it did make sense. So congratulations, Peter.
it's quite interesting at the macro level. When Jensen was talking about sovereign AI, I think that pretty much defines how the two camps are progressing. So countries who have believed in sovereign AI, given what's happening with geopolitics, I think in those countries, um, uh, where also the hyperscalers are not that deeply present, and operators play a role in data centers. I think those places, the AI RAN is getting traction first because there are multiple ways to justify the investment. Building your own data center, using that AI capacity for your own developers in the country, keeping your data in-house, keeping your AI models in-house, and so on and so forth. And so Indonesia, Japan, Korea, India, some of the Nordic countries. So those are the first movers in the space where the hyperscalers are deeply present, like Western Europe or North America. There is a hesitation and a wait and see approach in terms of figuring out, well, if I build this fabric and I don't really have a data center business to justify it, then will I be able to create demand or not? Let's keep the discussion around whether running RAN workloads on GPU makes sense or not. Just from a pure business point of view, can you create enough demand for the other workloads that's supposed to be run on these GPUs? And so there is some hesitation from operators. They want to wait and see before they decide one way or another.
Yeah. The way I looked at it, as this whole, let's say, maturity or evolutionary curve that you kind of described, Peter, in your your earlier comments, series of comments. I think that first phase of AI in RAN is something that is relevant today. Everything else, I think, is too hypothetical, especially the thesis on the monetization of, let's say, excess GPU or available GPU capacity at any given time. There's a lot of technical gaps there that need to be bridged. So I think operators and the industry eventually, and this is probably going to happen next year, are going to realize, look, there are too many bits and pieces that are not there to get us to, let's say, the fourth state of AI RAN or the fifth. But that first one is really interesting. It has very little to do with GPU. It's more about how do we apply various techniques from the radio all the way to, let's say, the RIC or the SMO in driving some optimizations, more, let's say, optimized sleep functions and power management, like those simple, boring stuff that actually has huge impact. There was another thing that, oh, geez, I wish I recall. There's like fleet management concepts as well, right? Where you can use a SMO and advanced AI techniques to manage a fleet of cell sites, so that you are using your backup power to run your cell sites during peak rate hours, and then recharging them at night at lower charging time, windows in the day or the evening. I thought like something simple like that was awesome. And you're looking holistically at the whole system, and you're applying AI in a very, very ingenious way, actually, that has outsized impact in terms of cost savings, just beyond just the efficiency of the RAN itself, right? It's just literally a out of the box thinking, really cool solution, and it's something that I saw at the Ericsson booth. So those are my thoughts on that. I kind of think that AI RAN is going to go the way of Open RAN. So given that I am the inventor of Open RAN Squid game, let's talk about that for a moment. What happened to Open RAN? Silent?
Oh, sorry, I froze. My screen froze. I didn't hear the question. Chetan, you answer, because I didn't hear the question.
Open RAN, it's like whatever, it's not a defined thing. It can be whatever you want it to be. And that has been the problem from the start. I always felt that Open RAN missed the 5G cycle because it came in probably a couple of years too late. And by that time, a lot of the prominent operators had already figured out their architectures and roadmaps. And so trying to fit that into that discussion has always been challenging. And the operational part that the Open RAN players have minimized over the years is the toughest part to overcome. When you go talk to the people who run these networks on a day-to-day basis, they don't want to get anything touched by a plethora of vendors in the name of efficiency. Like if you are gaining 10% efficiency, 20% efficiency, but operationally you're going to go down 30%, like it all nets out. So the challenge for Open RAN is you need one or two players who take on the burden of putting it all together and be the interface to the operator to run the networks in these various markets. Unless you have that system in place, Open RAN kind of falls apart. Like if you have 20 vendors and maybe two lead vendors, how invariably something will go wrong. How do you go about debugging the problem, A, and B, who do you point to fix it? Who gets penalized for that outage, and so on and so forth. So the operational things have never been like streamlined or well understood, and I think that has been the undoing of the Open RAN principle, as it was stated early on. Right now, Open RAN has morphed into something else, like either one player Open RAN or whatever it might be. It become into 6G. So the notion of open interfaces is a valid one and a useful one for the ecosystem. But how you operationalize Open RAN is where it gets tricky. So I think that has been a challenge with Open RAN.
No, I think I thought you were going to take us in a different direction, Leonard, but I would agree. I would agree that I think AI RAN is going to go the way of Open RAN, and that it's just going to become a background thing that exists, and maybe the terms will morph and it will mean something different, but it's just going to be there, and we won't talk about it. I mean, I had a conversation with a small software supplier that develops RAN stacks, right? They sell into a lot of different vertical industries, and they said we don't talk Open RAN. We interoperate with everyone. We just deliver. I mean, the concept and the basic idea of what's going on with Open RAN. Now, would there be a market for us if there hadn't been a big push on Open RAN? Maybe not, right? And so the concept that Open RAN was going for is sort of alive and strong, whether or not we use the term, right? Another company I was talking to, their BD guy was saying, I'd never talk Open RAN, right? They deliver silicon, right? RAN silicon, small players supporting particularly on the radio side of things. And so, look, I never talk about Open RAN. And the marketing guy's like, I do. It's like, well, yeah, that's because you're trying to highlight what we do and people get it. It may not always be exactly Open RAN compliant, but what they want to know is, will you work with different baseband providers? Will you work with different, radio, like, will you fit into an open solution? And I think AI RAN will probably, I think you're right, it may go the same way, where maybe it means different things, but the concept of integrating AI into the way we operate the radio access network and the way we run things, I think will be there, whether or not it fits those exact terminologies. I think same thing with Open RAN, right? I think it's going to be single vendor in some cases. It might be ecosystem in some cases. It may not actually be Open RAN, right? You don't need to do. I think a good example is you're talking SMO and RIC, right? You don't. I mean, the SMO and the RIC. I mean, the RIC is an Open RAN construct. It exists. But you don't need Open RAN to have a RIC. You can have you can institute a RIC without an Open RAN network. Those two things are separate. At the same time, it was born out of Open RAN. And I think it's a good example of, like, we may not talk about Open RAN in the same capital O. It might be small o Open RAN, not capital O. But the basic concepts, I think, are, that's what's going to have the impact on the market.
Yeah, I totally agree with you on that last bit. I'm a big fan of the SMO and the RIC, especially the non-real time. And, I think it's more about selectively interoperable RAN versus open, right? It's like, what kind of tools and do you want to use? What level of interoperability? What set of open interfaces and where at what level. That's basically what it's going to boil down to, and it's going to be specific to each of the operators because each
that's just a really bad marketing term. Leonard Lee and the Selectively Interoperable RAN Coalition, right? Selectively. I mean that has got marketing buzz all over. But you're right. I mean, it is. It'll work in some. But you're right. I mean, that's the thing. Like
guys,
it's not sexy, but it's right.
We can start it. We can start it next year.
Siren.
Yes.
Siren.
Yeah. So, okay, to wrap up, gentlemen, really quickly, where do you think we're going to land next time or next year? Where are we going to land at MWC 2026? Quick thoughts. Food for thought for our audience. Say
more AI. More AI. I think we'll still have more AI.
Okay. All right. That was easy. Okay.
Yeah, I think AI will continue to be the dominant theme next year as well. Probably more end-to-end discussions, more alignment. Hopefully less geopolitics next year, but who knows?
You think so? Okay, so here's mine. I think next year, instead of future first from the previous year, we're going to be grappling with global first because of the geopolitical challenges. How does the mobile industry stick together and not become so fragmented that we lose all the benefits of all these years of trying to come together and create common standards, interoperability, and all that stuff? I think that's going to be a real big topic, just because, like what we've been saying actually collectively, I think, through this session, which, by the way, gentlemen, I think is freaking awesome. I love you guys. I want you to know that. I love you guys.
We love
that. Yeah, that's what we're going to have to deal with. And I think through the course of the year, the three of us and the analyst community are going to be really challenged with questions, and a lot of the industry is going to be looking for guidance. And so hopefully we'll have some further conversations and debates about that. Gentlemen, thank you so much. This is really great. Peter, it's great to have you on again. It's been like so long.
Great to be here. Bug me anytime.
Yeah, and Chetan, of course, always. I mean, this guy is like friggin' legendary, right? He's like, I'm going to see you at GTC.
Yeah, right? I'll be there.
So are we going to hang out, or are we going to avoid each other like we did?
I don't know how it happened. Maybe it's a smaller setup, so we'll run each other. Yeah,
that was really tragic that we didn't bump into each other.
I'll send my digital twin. to GTC, so okay. you can meet up. You can meet up with him.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, and you can hang out with Jensen's, 1 billion digital twins. But yes, everyone. Hey, thanks for listening. We appreciate you watching this very special podcast recap of MWC 2025. Make sure to contact and connect with my guests, Peter Jarich and Chetan Sharma. I suggest that you reach out to them on LinkedIn. That's probably like the safest way these days, and find out more about Peter's work at GSMA Intelligence at www.gsmaintelligence.com. And of course, the illustrious Chetan Sharma and his wonderful work at Chetan Sharma Consulting. Just go and check out all his great content at www.chetansharmaconsulting.com. And then also, please subscribe to our podcast, and it'll be featured in the Next Curve YouTube channel. Check out the audio version on Buzzsprout. And also subscribe to the Next Curve research portal at www.next-curve.com for the tech and industry insights that matter. And we will see you next year to recap MWC 2026.